Peace everyone, Unmasked here, and welcome to a critique video. I have a lovely piece here by Shana. It's a colored pencil drawing of a rabbit, and I just wanted to go through a little critique because I've been doing the live critiques for several months now, and a lot of people have commented on how helpful some of the information that I provide throughout the critiques have been. So I thought, why not do a few critique videos to help, get more information out there? So the more you know, the more you know. So let's jump right into this. And I'm going to just talk about some of the things that could be better with the drawing, where she went right. And yeah, so let's just start there. So the first thing is the drawing is nice and accurate. So that's always the best place to start. Whether you're painting, whether you're coloring, it doesn't really matter. The first initial step is always to make sure that your drawing is nice and accurate. And here you can see the ear placement, the eye, the nose, all of the features, all of the major features that make up the rabbit are very accurately drawn. I overlaid them and got them as close as I could, and all the lines and everything are really, really close. So excellent job on making sure that your drawing is accurate. Now, let's just talk about the background really quick. So in this particular composition, the background takes up about 50% of the entire drawing overall. And for your background, we just have a quick look at the colors here. So I'm going to grab your background color. Just going to grab your background here real quick, and we see that we have this sort of grayish green. And if I grab like the brightest green here in the reference photo, you can see that the saturation levels are not really that comparable. And this could be a stylistic choice. You don't always have to copy the exact colors that you see in the reference photo. We're artists after all, we can make whatever choices we want, but just be cautious of the colors that you do choose, because if I go around and I sort of pick just about any shade of green in the reference photo, you'll notice that it's significantly more vibrant than all of the colors that I would get selecting your background. So don't be afraid to use really saturated colors. Like I said, using the dulled down greens, I think personally I like the softer greens. I don't really like the high vibrancy of the reference photo. So I sort of like your colors. But then again, the background is really blurry and out of focus. You sort of get that bokeh effect a little bit of the grass in the reference photo. And on your background, you can still see a lot of the texture, the pencil strokes. You can see a few lines in the work down here. You can see you can see some of these lines, these directional lines that your pencil created, some little scribble marks here and here and here. And you don't really want that in your background, because those lines don't add to anything really in the background. You even see a little bit of haloing around here with the lines circling the rabbit, and you wouldn't want that either, because you'd want the fur to feel textured on the edge. So you wouldn't want that like flat edge there against the rabbit. So just remember, when you're doing the background, especially in this case where it takes up essentially 50% of the artwork is the background, then you have to understand that the background is equally as important as the other part of the project. So you definitely want to apply more layers. Consider adding a slight variation of color. So the background in the reference photo, you don't have to match the saturation or the colors or anything like that, but I would recommend matching the variety of colors. In the reference photo, you have like these really yellow greens, you have a little bit more of a bluer green. So you have some variety of color there, and I would strongly recommend using a bit more variety and definitely more layers in your background. That's going to make it smoother. That's going to, and by making it smoother, it's going to actually bring your rabbit forward in the scene, make it stand out even more. So that's what I would recommend for the background. Now let's talk about the rabbit a little bit. And like I said, as far as the drawing goes, it's very accurate. And what you want to do, since most of the rabbit is just fur, I'm going to talk about the eye first. So the eye in the reference photo is not, it's not amazing, right? It sort of just looks like a black void with a singular highlight. There's no color to it. There's no interest to it. And in that case, what I would recommend is find a different reference photo, what I would call a character reference of an eye. And necessarily it doesn't really have to be a rabbit's eye. It could be any eye that you'd like, and use that to change the eye into something that looks better. In this case, the rabbit is clearly outside, so you could think blue sky, green grass. And just by doing that, if I grab your green here, and this might look a little awkward at first, but bear with me. So I'm going to imagine the spherical shape of the eye, and I'm just going to give it green on the bottom. So I'm going to give it a quick pass of your grass, your green grass, and then you sort of have blue here, but I'm going to brighten it a little bit. So I'm going to go a little bit bluer and bring the top side blue, something like this. And then I'm just going to play around with the amount of color that I have here. So I'm going to change this layer, see if something doesn't look a little bit better for me. Overlay is pretty nice. Let's go with soft light, right? And then I'm just going to play around with the opacity a bit. So maybe something like this. So now we have a little bit of blue, we have a little bit of green, and then I'm going to bring back that highlight. So I'm just going to bring back that highlight a little bit, and you can make the highlight brighter than the reference photo, but I'm going to keep it pretty close, and maybe a little touch here, and maybe a little bit of highlight down here and in the corner where the eyes tend to be a little bit more moisture around the corners and stuff like that. And let me just brighten that up a little bit. Yeah, I like that. And yeah, so I'll just keep it like that. I don't want to make too big of changes to the eye, but I just want you to see the difference that a little bit of color can make. So now you have the grass reflecting in the bottom part of the eye, you have the sky reflecting in the top part of the eye, the highlights a little bit brighter. So you can bridge away from what the reference photo gives you, and you can be a little bit more creative to make the eye a bit more interesting. That makes the eye stand out a bit more, and overall makes the rabbit stand out a bit more. All right, so before I move to the fur, I want to talk about just the colors in the ear. So the ear has this subsurface scattering, which is the technical term for the light entering the skin, bouncing around and kind of making it glow the way that it does. It's called subsurface scattering. And here again, the colors just aren't as bold as I'd like to see them. And so you really want to make sure that you're not afraid of color. So if we come in here and I grab this orange here, so this is the color of orange, and it's not crazy vibrant. It's not super bright orange. There's a few shades of orange, and then the veins themselves are another shade of like a reddish orange. So the colors aren't super crazy. They don't look like this. They're not that vibrant of a color. So they're still pretty natural. And if we have a look at your ears, you'll notice not only is the saturation level much more of a gray sort of tan, so they're lacking a bit of that orange hue to them, but they're also lighter. So they're lighter in value. And we go to your vein here, and your vein is darker in value, but it's the wrong hue. It's more of just like a clay brown as opposed to a red brown. And so By utilizing these really vibrant colors in the ears, this is what gives it the shine or the glow. And I'm not really going to I'm not going to try to repaint the ears. I'm just applying these colors to the ear on your work so you can see the color difference a little bit in context. So these colors very important to get. Not exactly, you don't have to have them exactly, but you get them closer and you're going to have that effect. You can sort of see with just the colors laid there, how it sort of creates that more translucent, glowing effect that the skin would have. So just make sure you pay closer attention to the colors, because the colors really make that effect feel real. So a bit bolder in those colors, and you'll have better looking ears. The one other thing I wanted to discuss with just the ears is you notice this rim light right at the top, this nice little highlight. This highlight doesn't necessarily come from the use of white on the tip of the ear. It actually comes from the use of this darker brownish color on the backside of the ear. So this is the color of the ear in the reference photo, and you can see if I make this ear darker, obviously it wouldn't be a flat color like that. It's this textured fur, but you can see how it makes those ears more separated. So you definitely want to make sure that your colors are correct and your values are correct. And that's going to give you that depth that you need in order to separate those two ears, because this way here, you miss that highlight, you miss that nice little highlight around the edge of the ear. And then also this ear's just not dark enough. And as you make it darker, it sort of creates that little bit of a three-dimensional separation between them. All right, so let's talk about the fur. As it is, I'm currently in the process of doing a tutorial. It's a tiger, but it's still fur. And all of the techniques that I'm going through apply directly to a project like this. Fur is something that I've always felt was very easy. And I don't mean to like pick on anybody if you struggle with fur. It is a struggle if you don't have a very clear procedure of doing it. I have a very procedural way of doing it, which makes it super easy. At least in my opinion, it makes it super easy. And so I'll talk you through the bare bone minimum of what you need to be thinking of when you're approaching fur. And this will make it 1,000 times easier. So the first thing, when you have your drawing and before you apply any of your colors or anything like that, what you want to identify first are all the major shapes that are created in the fur. And so I have a few of them highlighted here. So the first thing is identifying a little bit of the color shapes and the differences. So what I've highlighted in the reference photo is everywhere that sort of orange, yellow, brown fur appears on the rabbit. So if I make this go away, so pay attention to where all of the orange brown fur exists, and then I highlight it. Now there's a little bit more around the eyes, but you can always sprinkle that in later. You don't have to get every teeny tiny shape. It's all about identifying the big shape. So you can see how much larger these shapes are than like that little part on the eye or something. So always, always, always take the time to identify these shapes in your reference photos, because this is going to help you lay out the color of the fur much more accurately with no effort at all. I mean, to trace that on the reference photo takes 2 seconds, and to identify it takes even less time than that. It's sort of thinking about the fur as puzzle pieces, and you just want to sort of break down and separate the major parts. So in this case, you have the sort of gray, the black and white, the salt and peppered fur, and then you have the brown fur, and that's really it. If there was more colors, you could separate it into different shapes, but here we just sort of have 2 different flavors of fur. The next thing you want to think about is the shapes based on value. So in this case, I've highlighted the dark areas of the fur. And you can see that this is sort of separated from the yellow. So we have the yellow and they sort of overlap a little bit, but not so much. They're just another, another series of puzzle pieces that identifies the dark parts of the fur, or at least the darker parts of the fur. And so again, the shapes are very large, relatively simple to sort of come up with. And this isn't an exact science. Everybody's going to sort of look at the fur slightly different and identify slightly different shapes. What you want to do is you want to identify shapes that's going to help you translate it to your drawing. So you don't have to overthink this at all. Your shapes don't have to be exactly what I show here. They can be slightly different. You just want to think about them as larger shapes, and that's going to help you translate them over to your drawing much easier. You're going to get a much more accurate drawing, because what we'll see here, if we look at the dark shape, so I have this dark shape here. This is sort of like the jaw of the rabbit, and then it separates from the neck, where the neck has this lighter fur, and then the body, the rest of the body has a more darker toned fur. There's still white there, but it's darker overall. And then of course the back of the head has that lighter, around the eye has the lighter fur. So if we just look at the shapes that you've created in your rabbit, what we'll see is that there's a bit of a line sort of that's around the nose. Let me get a brighter color here. So there's this line, and then this is sort of darker fur right here. And this is what you've created. You can see the shape is very different, and that changes the anatomy of the rabbit. When you change the values of the fur and the shape of the fur, you change the underlying anatomy of the animal. And so it's really important to make sure that you match these puzzle pieces across from the reference photo to your drawing, because otherwise you're sort of manipulating the anatomy in oftentimes not a positive way. So that's happening here with just the nose. Now, if we have a look at the eye, we have like this bright fur that comes up like this, and then we sort of have like this eyebrow shape, and then the whiter fur sort of dissipates back to the back of the head and then comes around the eye. And there's a dark patch right here, so I'll do that in a different color. Let's do that in green. So there's like this dark patch under the eye, like right here, but then the bright fur sort of continues around the eye like this. But on yours, you sort of have this bright fur that comes down, and it creates a big shape here, and then you have the darker color, which is good right here, but it extends, for some reason it extends like this, and then the fur sort of does this. So you can see the significant difference in sort of the coloration, the shape of the coloration. And because those don't match, you're sort of changing, again, the anatomy of the animal in a way that doesn't reflect what it should look like. And so you want to translate those shapes a bit better. The eyebrow in particular is the eye area is a very recognizable part of any animal, whether it's a rabbit or a dog or a cat. The eyes, nose, and ears of animals are really the identifiable characteristics that make them recognizable. So if you want to do like an animal portrait, a pet portrait for a client or something, you need to make sure that the eyes, nose, and ears are perfect, because that's the recognizable features that the owner is going to pick up on. So if you want your client to recognize their pet in whatever piece you do for them, then you want to make sure that those features are done really, really well. There's always fluctuation in the fur, so the fur is not the most recognizable part. There can be recognizable features like, a spot around the eye or a little dark spot around the mouth or something like that. But again, the placement of the eyes, nose, and ears are going to be far more important. Anyways, so continuing on the fur, you can see some of the darker shapes just aren't accurately translated. So I think we all get that. So let's move on to how to do the fur, how to get the fur texture a bit more accurately as well. And this is something that I've been going through with my tiger eye project that's sitting behind me. I don't know if you can see it. No, you can't really see it, but I've laid out the process in essentially 4-ish steps, kind of 3 to 4 steps. Very, very simple. The first step obviously is to identify the shapes. So that's the first step. You always want to identify the shapes and color changes that exist in the fur. Obviously, with something like a tiger, you're talking about the stripes. You have the orange and the white and the black fur in tiger. In this case, you have orange, brown, you have white-ish, and then you have black. But the thing with this is there's a lot of salt and pepper. And I'll show you the simplest technique in the world to do salt and pepper fur. It's incredibly easy. But so once you have the shapes, so you have the shapes lined out, okay, this needs to be part of your line art for your drawing. So when you do the initial line art drawing for your coloring or painting, because this is universal, it's not just specific to colored pencils. So translate these important puzzle pieces over so that you don't have to do guesswork later on. Just makes it easier. So that's step 1. Step 2 is to identify the flow of the fur. So what I mean by that is if I just zoom in here a little bit on the reference, you can see that the fur is going this way here, right? It's going up, and then it starts to curve here, and now it's going this way. And then here it curves up again. Around the eye, it's curving like this. And you can do this on the reference photo to help you out. Usually I just do it right on my drawing because I've been doing it for so many years. I can just translate it in real time. But you want to make sure that all of this flow, so notice the direction changes. So how it fans out from the nose like this. There's a lot of changing here. You can see it sort of collides with this other part. So it stops here and it changes direction immediately. So there's a collision in direction here. So that's really important feature because that also tells you the anatomy of the animal. So all of this curves here. All of this is curving down. You can see this fur a little bit longer here. So the length of your line also needs to correspond with the length of the fur. So that's another important feature of this. So where the fur is really short, like here, notice I'm just going to do really like dashed lines, little dashed lines. On the nose, it's so short, I'm just going to do dots, right? So there's no direction to a dot. All this, do little dashed lines, and I identify not only the length, but also the direction. And the length is just attributed to the length of the line that I use. And so once you identify the flow of the fur, now these lines here, they need to also translate over to your drawing. So these fur directions, they need to be what your lines are when you're coloring or painting it. Like I said, it doesn't matter the medium. This technique is the same. So all of your lines as you're coloring in need to follow this flow direction, or painting in. Doesn't matter. It's all the same. No matter the medium, this technique works with painting, digital painting, colored pencils, watercolors, acrylic paint, uh, pastels. It's universal. Trust me. I've done it in every medium. So it's 100% universal. Um, and so make sure you begin filling in your shapes. Remember, don't forget about your shapes. So you're filling in your shapes with the corresponding colors with these lines. And don't be afraid to make somewhat obvious lines with your pencils or paintbrushes. Because the first step is to make sure you lay out that flow of the fur. You want to get the flow of the fur correct. And then you just do multiple layers covering the paper. So the first layer is to identify the flow of the fur and apply the flow. And it's going to look like a bunch of lines that sort of look like what I've created here, just a bunch of little lines, and there's going to be gaps, and you're going to see the paper and all of that. But then once you have that laid out, you just do, 2, 3, 4, however many layers you need to cover up the paper. Okay. And then once you have the paper covered, you're going to have the texture of the fur without ever drawing an individual hair. So you're going to get a really soft, you're going to get a look very much similar to what you have in your rabbit here, because your fur is, it has a hint of furness to it, but it's sort of a softness. It doesn't quite look like the sort of rough fur that the reference photo has. And once you get to this stage, you can be more flexible with your color choice. You're gonna add some toning colors, and that's sort of the third stage, is adding like the toning colors and sort of embellishing the color of the fur, making it look interesting. The next thing that you do is that's when you add the flyaways. You add the individual hairs, and more oftentimes you can count the number of individual hairs on your two hands. Like, you're just going to throw in a few of these. Certainly the whiskers. Your rabbit doesn't have any whiskers right now, so you're going to throw in some whiskers. Throw in some of these little hairs. I can see maybe you use like a craft knife to scrape some of the colored pencil off the paper. That's a great way to add some of the textures, but you want to make sure that you're adding them in the relative direction of the fur direction. So you don't want to change that too much. So I just added 4 whiskers, 3 eyebrow hairs, and maybe a handful of the white fur down here on like the neck area. And immediately it becomes more convincing to be fur. Like, here's without it, and it still looks like a furry animal, right? But with just like a handful of extra lines, it immediately becomes more furry. Like, it looks more furry than it did before with just a few extra lines. And that's really the secret. You don't need a billion individually drawn hairs. Really, you just need like a handful of them, but you need a handful of them on a well established texture. So that's why you line out all of the flow of the fur first. You do those layers with a disciplined stroke. You want to follow those lines that you create. And then you get this soft texture of fur. You add a few embellishments with your toning colors, and then you add your flyaway hairs, and that's it. And that's hair in a nutshell, and you'll get a far better result with just those 4 steps than trying to do each individual hair all at once. And yeah. That's about it. Thank you so much for the submission, Shana. I appreciate it. Your rabbit looks great. And hopefully all the tips that I've went over today help a number of you. And I'll see you in the next live stream. Take care. Peace.